The floor was already wet when the guards finally opened the door. An inmate lay face down near the showers, not moving. His orange uniform was dark across the back. Blood slowly ran across the concrete toward a small drain. Other inmates stood pressed against the walls, silent now, hands raised. A guard spoke into his radio. His voice shook. "We have an unresponsive inmate. Repeat, unresponsive inmate." The cameras above flickered. One went black. This was a Texas state prison, a place built for rules and control. But in this moment, control was gone. As officers rushed inside, another alarm began to sound from a different building. Then another alarm followed it. Somewhere deeper inside the prison, a locked door suddenly opened when it should not have. Something had gone very wrong inside this Texas prison a few years ago, and it was not over yet. Years before that night, the prison looked calm from the outside. It sat on flat land, surrounded by fences and long roads. Cars passed by without slowing down. Most people never thought about what happened inside. It was just another Texas prison holding hundreds of men. Inside, life followed a strict routine. Lights came on early. Inmates stood for count. Breakfast trays slid through metal slots. Guards walked the halls with radios and keys. Days passed slowly, one after another, but problems were already forming. The prison did not have enough staff. Correctional officers were quitting faster than new ones could be hired. The job paid little for how dangerous it was. Long hours, stress, and fear pushed many officers away. One guard, Mark Reynolds, had worked there for 6 years. He used to work normal shifts. Now he worked 12 to 16 hours at a time. He was tired every day, but he kept coming back because someone had to. Many officers were new. Some had only months of experience. They knew the rules, but they did not yet understand prison behavior. They missed warning signs. The inmates noticed. They noticed guards hesitating. They noticed slow response times. They noticed when doors opened late or stayed closed too long. At first, nothing serious happened. A late shower, a delayed meal, a small argument that ended quickly. Reports were written. Supervisors moved on, but tension grew. The prison also had old equipment. Some cameras no longer worked. Others showed blurry images. Radios lost signal in certain areas. Doors sometimes jammed. Repairs took weeks or months. Inmates learned where cameras were broken. They learned where guards avoided walking alone. They learned which shifts were short on staff. Most inmates wanted no trouble, but some saw opportunity. Gangs inside the prison became more active. They handled problems quietly. Fights happened in blind spots. Victims stayed silent. Guards suspected gang control, but without witnesses, nothing could be proven. One afternoon, a fight broke out during recreation. By the time officers arrived, it was over. Both inmates were taken away. No weapons were found. It was written up as a small incident, but it showed something important. Response was slow. As months passed, pressure built. Then summer arrived. Texas heat filled the prison. Air barely moved inside some units. Fans pushed hot air around. Inmates grew angry. Officers grew exhausted. Medical complaints increased. Headaches, dizziness, anxiety. Still, schedules stayed the same. 1 week, staffing dropped even lower. Officers called in sick. Others had worked too many hours. Supervisors made a choice. Movement was limited. Inmates stayed locked in longer. Recreation was canceled. Showers were rushed. Meals arrived late. Anger spread fast. Men shouted through doors, banged on metal, demanded answers. Guards promised it was temporary. Hours passed. Nothing changed. By nightfall, one officer was assigned to watch an entire housing unit alone. He stayed inside the control booth, locked behind glass. Inside the unit, inmates paced. Some argued. Others stayed quiet, watching closely. Then it happened. A fight broke out near the showers. The camera in that corner showed only shadows. The officer saw movement and called for help. The radio crackled. No one answered. When response teams finally arrived, the fight was over. One inmate lay on the floor, not moving. Medical staff rushed in. Inmates were ordered against the walls. The unit fell silent. The man was taken away. He did not survive. As officers secured the scene, another emergency call came in from a different part of prison. Then another. The prison was slipping out of control, and the night was far from over. The first lockdown order went out across the prison just after midnight. Metal doors slammed shut one after another. Lights stayed on. Sirens echoed through the buildings. Inmates were ordered to lie flat on their bunks or on the floor, hands visible. Guards moved fast, their radios talking over each other. But the lockdown did not bring calm. It brought fear. Inside the unit where the inmate had died, officers tried to understand what had just happened. Blood still marked the floor. Medical staff had already left. Supervisors stood near the showers, looking at broken tiles and bent metal. No one spoke much. They all knew this was serious. A death inside a prison always triggered questions. But this one felt different. It had happened during limited movement. Cameras had failed. Staff response had been slow. Too slow. While investigators secured that unit, word spread to the prison. Inmates talked through vents under doors and by shouting down hallways. Stories changed as they moved, but one thing stayed the same. Someone had died, and the prison was on edge. In another building, Officer James Walker was working his second shift in a row. He had been awake for almost 20 hours. When the alarm sounded earlier, his stomach dropped. Now he stood outside a different housing unit, helmet on, shield in hand. He listened to his radio. Reports were coming in fast. Arguments, door damage, inmates refusing orders. This was not normal lockdown behavior. Usually when lockdown happened, things quieted down. Inmates stayed still. Everyone waited. Tonight, they didn't. Walker and his team entered one unit slowly. Inmates were supposed to be on the floor. Most were, but a few were standing near the back, whispering. An officer shouted commands. Everyone complied. For now, back in the control room, supervisors looked at camera feeds. Some screens worked. Some didn't. One camera showed a hallway empty. Another froze mid-frame. A supervisor rubbed his face. They were running blind. As the night went on, small incidents kept happening. An inmate refused cuffs. Another flooded his cell. Someone else set off a fire alarm using toilet paper and heat. Each incident pulled officers away from somewhere else. Staffing was already thin. Around 2 a.m., medical called in again. An inmate in a different unit was having trouble breathing. Officers escorted him out. Medical staff said it might be heat-related stress mixed with anxiety. He survived, but it added pressure. The prison was cracking under stress. Outside the walls, families slept unaware of what was happening inside. No news alerts. No official statements. Just a normal Texas night. Inside, officers moved nonstop. Around 3 a.m., investigators began reviewing footage from earlier. They watched the broken camera angles again and again. They saw the shadows near the showers. They saw the delayed response. They saw how many minutes passed before help arrived. Those minutes mattered. Meanwhile, inmates were not resting. In one housing unit, tension rose again. Two rival groups began shouting at each other through doors. Officers ordered silence. The shouting stopped, but the threat stayed. Some inmates believed the death earlier would bring punishment. Others believed it would bring opportunity. Gangs often saw chaos as a chance to settle scores. At about 4 a.m., another call came in. An officer reported movement inside a locked unit. That should not have been possible. Supervisors rushed to the location. When they arrived, they found a door partially open. The locking mechanism had failed. It had jammed earlier than released. 2 inmates had left their cells. They were restrained quickly. No injuries this time. But the message was clear. The prison was not secure. Morning shift began to arrive just before sunrise. Fresh officers walked into a prison already exhausted. They received quick briefings. No details. Just orders. Stay alert. Expect trouble. Inmates were kept locked down longer than planned. Breakfast was delayed. Showers were canceled. Anger built again. By mid-morning, the prison felt heavy. Quiet, but not calm. Officers sensed it. Inmates sensed it too. Then the news began to spread inside. The inmate who died had a name. He had connections. And people were asking questions. In one unit, an inmate began banging on his door, demanding answers. Others joined. The noise grew loud. Officers issued warnings. The banging stopped. Minutes later, something hit the control booth window. An object bounced off the glass and fell to the floor. Officers went on alert. They prepared response teams again. At the same time, investigators questioned inmates from the first unit. Most refused to speak. Some said they saw nothing. Others said the cameras were broken. No one admitted anything. Around noon, heat returned. The prison grew warm again. Fans struggled. Officers in heavy gear sweated through their uniforms. Medical calls increased. Then, just after lunchtime, the radio crackled with urgency. A fight had broken out in a different housing wing. This one was bigger. Multiple inmates. Weapons were suspected. Response teams moved fast. Doors opened and closed. Orders were shouted. By the time officers reached the area, several inmates were injured. One was bleeding heavily. He was carried out on a stretcher, alive, but barely. As officers cleared the unit, they found homemade weapons hidden in vents and mattresses, items that should have been discovered earlier. How had they been missed? Supervisors asked the same question. The answer was obvious. There had not been enough staff to search properly. As the afternoon dragged on, tension reached a new level. Officers were tired. Inmates were angry. The death from a night before still hung over everything. Then, near the end of the shift, the most dangerous call came in. A guard reported that inmates were refusing lockdown orders in one of the largest housing units. Dozens of men were involved. Response teams rushed there. Before they arrived, the sound of metal slamming echoed through the building, then shouting, then screams. And just as officers reached the unit door, a message came over the radio that made everyone freeze. An officer had gone down inside the unit, and no one knew how badly he was hurt. The hallway went silent when the radio message spread. An officer was down. For a moment, no one moved. Then everything happened at once. Response teams rushed toward the housing unit. Boots hit the floor hard. Radios shouted commands over each other. Doors were open and locked again as officers moved through checkpoints. Inside the unit, chaos filled the air. Inmates were yelling. Some backed away. Others pressed forward. The noise bounced off concrete walls, making it hard to hear anything clearly. Officer James Walker was among the first to enter. The officer who had gone down was lying near the center of the unit. His helmet was off. His radio was cracked. Another officer dragged him away while the team formed a line. Shields up, orders were shouted again and again. Inmates to the ground. Now, some obeyed. Some hesitated. That hesitation mattered. The response team pushed forward, slowly taking control. One by one, inmates were forced down. Zip ties clicked shut. The noise faded into heavy breathing and boots scraping the floor. The injured officer was carried out. He was alive, but badly hurt. Medical staff rushed him away. Later, it would be confirmed that he had a broken arm and head injuries. He would survive, but he would not return to work for a long time. The unit was locked down completely. For the first time since the death the night before, the prison felt still. But it was not peace. It was shock. Supervisors gathered in the command room. They reviewed reports. They counted injuries. They listed damages. They tried to understand how things had spiraled this far. One inmate dead, several injured, an officer hurt, weapons found, doors failing, cameras useless, too many failures. Investigators arrived from outside the prison. They spoke with supervisors. They asked hard questions. Why were units understaffed? Why were cameras broken? Why did it take so long to respond? No one had good answers. By evening, the prison was under full lockdown. No movement, no recreation, no visits. Phones were shut off. Inmates sat alone in their cells. Some were scared. Some were angry. Some were thinking. Word spread quietly. The inmate who had died had been part of a group. Others believed retaliation might come. Rumors moved fast in the silence. Officers stayed alert. Extra shifts were added. Outside agencies sent help. But fatigue was everywhere. Officer Walker sat in a break room, helmet beside him, hands shaking slightly. He had seen fights before. He had broken them up, but this felt different. This felt like the prison had lost control. Night came again. Lights stayed on. Cameras were watched closely, even the broken ones. Officers doubled up where they could. Supervisors walked the halls themselves. Around midnight, a quiet call came from medical. An inmate was refusing food and water. He was pacing his cell nonstop. Medical staff asked for an escort. 2 officers went. They returned without incident. Low-level problems like that continued through the night. Nothing major. Nothing loud. But the tension never left. Early the next morning, investigators began interviews. Inmates were taken one at a time. Most said nothing. Some claimed they were asleep. Others said they feared retaliation. One inmate spoke quietly. He said the prison had been breaking down for months. He said guards were stretched thin. He said inmates knew when they could act without being stopped. His statement was noted. Later, investigators walked the unit where the first death happened. They took photos. They measured distances. They tested radios. One radio lost signal near the showers. That mattered. They tested the camera again. It failed. Maintenance logs were reviewed. Repair requests had been filed. Repairs had not been completed. The picture became clearer. This was not one mistake. It was many. By afternoon, news finally reached the outside world. A short statement was released. An incident occurred at a Texas state prison. One inmate is deceased. An investigation is ongoing. Families began calling. Media began asking questions. Inside, inmates heard about the statement. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. They knew it was bigger than that. As the day went on, tension rose again. Lockdown continued longer than expected. Meals were delayed. Showers canceled. Anger returned. In one housing unit, inmates began shouting together. It started as complaints, then turned into demands. Officers ordered silence. It did not come. Response teams moved closer, ready again. Supervisors debated their next step. Force would calm things, but it could also make them worse. They waited. Then, without warning, smoke began to rise from inside the unit. Someone had set a fire. Alarm screamed. Officers rushed forward. Smoke filled the hallway. Inmates coughed and shouted. Visibility dropped fast. This was no longer just violence. It was a full emergency. As officers prepared to enter the smoke-filled unit, a new message crackled over the radio. A door in another building had failed again, and inmates were moving through it. At the same time, the prison was now facing 2 major emergencies at once, and there were still not enough officers to handle either one. Smoke rolled out of the housing unit and into the hallway, thick and gray. Officers covered their faces and moved forward anyway. Alarms screamed above them. Lights flashed red. Somewhere inside the unit, inmates were coughing and yelling. Orders were being shouted, but it was hard to tell who could hear them. Fire inside a prison was one of the worst situations possible. Officer James Walker stood near the entrance, heart pounding. He could feel the heat even through his uniform. Fire extinguishers were brought forward. Officers sprayed blindly into the smoke, aiming where they thought the flames were. Inside the unit, the fire was small but dangerous. Burning paper and cloth stuffed into a trash bin had filled the space with smoke. Inmates backed away toward their cells. Some dropped to the floor. Others banged on doors, screaming for air. Officers pushed in. It took long minutes to bring the fire under control. When the smoke finally began to clear, inmates were ordered flat on the ground. Coughing echoed through the unit. Eyes burned. Tempers flared. Medical staff rushed in again. Several inmates were treated for smoke inhalation. None died, but it was close. As officers secured the area, the second emergency worsened. In another building, the failed door had allowed multiple inmates out of their cells. They had not gone far, but the situation was tense. Officers surrounded the area, weapons ready. Commands were shouted again and again. This time, inmates did not resist. They were restrained and returned to their cells. But the damage was already done. The prison had now experienced a death, multiple violent incidents, a fire, an injured officer, and 2 major security failures in less than 48 hours. This was no longer just a bad night. It was a breakdown. Outside agencies arrived in greater numbers. State officials were notified. Investigators expanded their work. Every incident was logged. Every failure was written down. Supervisors looked exhausted. Some had not slept at all. By the end of the second night, the prison was placed under extended lockdown. No one moved unless ordered. No programs. No visits. No phones. Silence returned, but it was a heavy silence. Inside their cells, inmates lay awake. Some replayed the chaos in their minds. Others worried about retaliation. Some feared what punishment might come next. Officers walked the halls carefully. Every sound made them stop and listen. Radio stayed close to their mouths. No one relaxed. The following morning, investigators met with prison leadership. The questions were sharper now. Why were staffing levels allowed to drop so low? Why were broken cameras left unfixed? Why were inmates kept locked in extreme heat? Why were warnings ignored? Leadership had answers, but none were good enough. Reports showed months of understaffing, budget problems, hiring delays, equipment repair backlogs, requests that had been approved but never acted on. It painted a clear picture. The prison had been slowly failing long before the first alarm ever sounded. As days passed, more details came out. The inmate who died had asked for help weeks earlier. He had reported feeling unsafe. His request had been noted, but no move was made. Too many requests, too few beds, too little staff. The injured officer filed his report from home. He described how fast the situation turned violent, how backup felt far away, how fear took over. Other officers shared similar stories. Morale dropped even lower. Media attention increased. News vans parked outside the prison gates. Families demanded answers. Advocacy groups called for investigations. Inside, inmates watched it all unfold from behind bars. They knew the truth. This did not happen because of one fight or one bad decision. It happened because problems were ignored for too long. One evening, several days after the first death, a quiet announcement was made over the prison radio system. State officials would be taking temporary control of operations. Extra officers would be brought in. Equipment would be inspected. Policies would be reviewed. For some, it was a relief. For others, it was too late. As night fell again, Officer Walker stood in the hallway, listening to the low hum of the building. The prison felt different now. Tighter, watched, controlled, but also fragile, because everyone inside knew one thing. If these changes had come earlier, a man might still be alive. And as the lights stayed on and doors stayed locked, one final report crossed the desk of investigators. It suggested that the first fight, the one near the showers, might not have started the chaos at all. It might have been the result of something that happened even earlier, something no one had noticed. Yet, days later, the prison was quieter than it had ever been. Not calm, just quiet. Extra officers now walked the halls. Some came from other Texas prisons. Some came from outside teams sent in to help. Cameras were checked again and again. Broken ones were finally repaired or replaced. Doors were tested every shift. Radios were upgraded. On the surface, it looked like control had returned. But inside, the damage was already done. Investigators continued their work. They reviewed old reports going back months. They read medical requests. They read safety complaints. They read staffing warnings written by supervisors who had begged for help. The pattern was clear. Nothing that happened that night was sudden. It had been building for a long time. The inmate who died had asked to be moved weeks earlier. He said he felt unsafe. He said tensions were rising in his unit. His request was logged, then buried under dozens of others. Too many inmates. Too few beds. Too little staff. The system chose to wait. Officer James Walker returned to work after several days off. He walked slower now. He watched everything. Every sound made him stop. He had seen what happened when small problems were ignored. Other officers felt the same. Some talked about quitting. Some already had. New officers were hired, but training took time. Experience could not be replaced overnight. Inside their cells, inmates adjusted to new rules. Lockdown lifted slowly. Movement returned in short steps. Showers came back. Meals came on time again. But trust did not return. Inmates no longer believed the prison could protect them. Officers no longer believed backup would arrive in time. Everyone was more careful. Weeks later, the investigation report was finished. It did not blame one person. It blamed the system. Understaffing, broken equipment, ignored warnings, delayed responses. All of it added up. State officials promised change. Better pay, more hiring, faster repairs, stronger oversight. Some changes happened. Others moved slowly. Outside the prison, the news cycle moved on. New stories replaced old ones. Cameras left. Reporters stopped calling. But inside the prison, the memory stayed. The showers where it began were cleaned and repaired. New cameras watched that corner now. Officers passed by it every day. They remembered. What went wrong inside this Texas prison a few years ago was not just violence. It was silence. Silence when help was needed. Silence when warnings were given. Silence when problems were allowed to grow. And that silence cost a life. The prison still stands today. The fences are still high. The doors still lock. The alarms still work. But everyone inside knows the truth. Control can be lost faster than anyone expects. And once it is gone, the damage cannot be undone.